Bonjour, mesdames et messieurs. Bienvenue au Musée des beaux-arts de Montréal et félicitations d'avoir bravé le froid pour venir nous rejoindre. Je m'appelle Danielle Robert, je suis responsable des activités culturelles. D'abord, je dois vous informer que pour des raisons vraiment hors de notre contrôle, en fait pour des raisons de santé plus précisément, que la conférence de Sylvie Fortin prévue cet après-midi ne pourra pas avoir lieu. En remplacement, Stéphane Aquin a généreusement accepté d'offrir une deuxième présentation. Elle sera intitulée « Peter Doig, les chemins de la peinture ». So, organized by the Montreal Museum of Fine Arts and the National Galleries of Scotland, Peter Doig, No Foreign Lands, is the first major exhibition to be devoted to this remarkable painter in North America, and the first since the retrospective presented in 2008 by London State Britain, the Musée d'art moderne de la ville de Paris, and Frankfurt's Kunsthalle. After Edinburgh, where the artist was born, it's now the turn of Montreal, where he grew up and where he returned for some years in his late 20s, to host this historic presentation, the only one in North America, which has already received critical acclaim. The co-curators of the exhibition are Stéphane Aquin and Juliane Delaney and Keith Hartley of Edinburgh, chief curator of the Scottish National Gallery of Modern Art, and the author of one of the catalogue essays, Peter Doig, Visual Intelligence. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our first guest of this special lecture series, Keith Hartley.
Merci beaucoup. Thank you very much. In this talk today, I want to concentrate on Peter Doig's uses of visual language and show that the way he works is analogous to the way that thought processes are usually seen. In the same way that not all intelligence is related to logical thought, so not all thought is based in language. Artists have known this instinctively through their practice for a long time, even though they might map out the design and composition of a work in some detail using consciously derived ideas. When it comes to many of the most significant decisions concerning color, forms, placement, and even the initial conception of a work, these are often intuitive, albeit informed by training and experience, and are reached in a non-linguistic manner. They are intelligent decisions, but part of our visual intelligence, what Rudolf Arnheim called visual thinking. Arnheim and other Gestalt psychologists have shown that the acts of visual perception are not purely mechanical, a passive receiving of data that are then passed on to the rational mind to make sense of. They have argued that intelligence and memory are involved in the very process of perceiving the world about us. Without it, we would be unable to see different objects and recognize the patterns that constitute the appearance of reality. Those of us with sight all possess this intelligence of the eye. Otherwise, it would be difficult for us to make sense of the world. What visual artists have is the ability to develop these skills and use them to give enhanced meaning to the reality they choose to depict or create. Part of that meaning comes from recognizing and creating what Picasso called assonances between things, the shapes and colors that they share. As Picasso said to Françoise Gillot, painting is poetry and is always written in verse with plastic rhymes, never in prose. In the later part of the 20th century, this traditional virtue of the visual arts, and especially of painting, came under increasing criticism by critics, art historians, art theorists, and artists themselves. They took their cue from Marcel Duchamp's disdain for what he termed retinal or visual painting, and for the oft-cited 19th century view that an artist should be stupid like a painter, bête comme un peintre. Duchamp had maintained that before the 19th century, painting had been in the service of the mind, not of aesthetic pleasure. In an interview with James Johnson Sweeney, he said, "Until the last 100 years, all painting had been literary or religious. It had been at the service of the mind. This characteristic was lost little by little during the last century. The more sensual a painting provided, the more animal it became, the more highly it was regarded." This is a work by Matisse in our collection in Edinburgh. The more sensual, he concedes condescendingly, it was a good thing to have had Matisse's work for the beauty it provided. However, he went on, it created a new wave of physical painting in this century, or at least fostered the tradition we inherited from the 19th century masters. Attitudes such as this, and the emphasis that conceptual art from the late 1960s placed on the idea or concept that generated a work of art rather than its actual physical making, led to a disapproval, or at the very least, a distrust of painting that was only made harsher by some of the materialist excesses of neo-expressionist painting in the 1970s and 1980s. It was at a time and place when such discussions about the pros and cons of painting were being were most heated that Peter Doig studied art in London. He was at the Wimbledon School of Art in 1979 to 80 and St. Martin's School of Art in 1980 to 1983, precisely at the time that painting was being rediscovered. In 1981, the highly influential exhibition A New Spirit in Painting took place at the Royal Academy in London. It deliberately set out to challenge prevailing orthodoxies that painting had become academic and repetitive, and that it had the capacity neither for technical mastery nor for originality, that only the New York School of Abstract Expressionism could provide the foundations for future developments in painting, and that only the French tradition of painting from the Impressionists through to Matisse and Picasso was of any account. The New Spirit in Painting exhibition championed, among other things, the North European Expressionist tradition, the London School of Bacon, Freud, Auerbach, and Kittai, and independent spirits such as Balthus and Guston. While Doig was at college in the late 1970s and early 1980s, this exhibition was not a lone voice. Nicholas Sirota, now director of Tate, at that time at the Whitechapel Gallery, showed paintings by Gerhard Richter, David Bomberg, and Markus Lüpertz in 1979, Max Beckmann and Georg Baselitz in 1980, Bryce Marden in 1981, Anselm Kiefer and Philip Guston in 1982, and Francesco Clemente, Bruce MacLean, and Malcolm Morley in 1983. Doig acknowledges the importance to him of this renewed interest in painting, but says he tended to look towards American painters, partly because of his upbringing in Canada, but also because he would often spend time in New York on his trips back to see his family. An exhibition in London that had a particular impact on him was the Who Chicago show at the Camden Arts Center in 1981, which contained punchy, not to say raunchy, paintings by Ed Paschke, Roger Brown, and Jim Nutt. It was works like these, as well as paintings by the New York-based British artist Malcolm Morley and the up-and-coming graffiti artists of New York, that had most impact on Doig's paintings in the 1980s. Doig returned to Canada in 1986, but feeling that he had more to learn about painting, returned to London in 1989 to study for a master's degree at Chelsea School of Art. By this time, the art critical debate had become less favorable towards painting and had moved towards a form of neo-conceptualism, less dry than the conceptual art of the 1960s and 1970s, and more visceral in its approach, but still decidedly antithetical to any form of expressionist painting. By 1989, the so-called YBA, Young British Artists phenomenon, had made itself felt in the form of key exhibitions, such as the group show Freeze in 1988, initiated by Damien Hirst. Asked in 2006 by Karen Wright what it was like to be a painter at Chelsea in 1989, Doig made clear the difficulties and problems, and I quote, "I think the powers that be in the art world were almost embarrassed by painting in those days, particularly painting that wasn't heavily conceptualized or theorized." He went on to defend his type of painting in particular and to criticize naive conceptions of painting in general. "I think my work is conceptual because it's ideas-based, but I can understand why people hated painting back then, and people have that awful notion of how being a painter is somehow romantic." Doig seems to answer Duchamp's criticism of modern painting, at least as far as his own work is concerned. His paintings are ideas-based, but in point of fact, his reply merely serves to highlight a fundamental problem in Duchamp's argument. What exactly constitutes an idea and its putative home in the mind? Does an idea only have the elevated status of being in the service of the mind if it can be expressed in words? Do visual ideas, which cannot be expressed in words or only very approximately, not count? Doig parts company with Duchamp on this matter and sides with painters such as Matisse in perhaps the clearest and most profound exposition of what it is that a painter expresses. Notes of a Painter, written in 1908, Notes d'un peintre, Matisse is unequivocal. The thought of a painter must not be considered to be separate from his pictorial needs. That is, the painter expresses his thought in visual language. Doig, in answer to a question by Matthew Higgs, comes to similar conclusions. His paintings, he said, and I quote, are totally non-linguistic. There is no textual support to what you are seeing. Often I'm trying to create a numbness. I'm trying to create something that is questionable, something that is difficult, if not impossible, to put into words. The question, as with all art, is how does one begin? Something cannot come out of nothing, and ideas have to be born and nourished. In Doig's case, as with many painters, it is the visual world that is the starting point. Doig has said, the imagination has to be fueled by image. I'm interested in mediated, almost cliched notions of a pastoral landscape, in how notions about the landscape are manifested and reinforced in, say, advertising or film. Yet at the same time, many of the paintings are rooted in my own experience. There exists a tension between these two approaches, between the often generic representation of a pastoral scene and the investment in my own experience of the landscape. End of quote. Although pre-existing images of whatever subject have always existed for artists, and from the 19th century onwards, photographs and photographic reproductions have increasingly become the dominant visual backdrop to our lives, it is really only after the 1960s, after the pop art media revolution, that the photographic image became acknowledged as an almost ubiquitous media screen through which we view reality. Artists now regularly use photographic images, whether found or taken themselves, not only for inspiration, but as the basis of their artwork. This may be for critical purposes or, more neutrally, to extend the artist's range of images, to examine reality from unexpected angles, stop motion, for example, or to compare and contrast. Throughout the 1990s, based in London, Doig invariably used photographs as the starting point for his paintings, often of Canadian subjects, what he called homely paintings, such as ordinary houses or people enjoying themselves out in the snow. But right from the beginning, he used screening devices such as trees or falling snow, not only to defamiliarize the scene, to produce a slightly sinister atmosphere, but more importantly, to create a rich surface pattern and texture in the paintings. Frequent mention, quite rightly, has been made about the impact of Munch's work on Doig, paintings such as Red Virginia Creeper of 1898 to 1900, or Eye in Eye of 1894, both shown in the exhibition of Munch's work at the National Gallery in London in 1992 to 93, and also of the landscapes of the Canadian painters such as David Milne and Tom Thomson. But more generally, one could surmise the impact of painters such as Anselm Kiefer and Zygmunt Polke, both of these German artists who were widely shown in London and elsewhere in the 1980s and 1990s, painted over images derived from photographs or prints, creating a rich surface effect while still allowing the image beneath to dominate the composition. Rich surface effects of varying kinds were developed by Doig for his paintings in the 1990s. As well as screens of trees, he painted complex reflections in water and on ice. He divided his works into horizontal bands of sky, distance, middle ground, and foreground, and produced features such as stone walls to create geometrical patterns. The result was a flattening of the works, an emphasis on the picture plane. In this respect, Doig was following the general example of avant-garde modernist painting. This is particularly apparent in Doig's large, snow-covered landscapes such as Ski Jacket and figure in landscape, mountain landscape number 2, where he abandoned the idea of any foreground screen and opened things out. Colors and shapes echo each other across the canvas and are so abstracted that there is more than a passing resemblance to works by American abstract painters such as Robert Ryman. In the years immediately before he moved to Trinidad, at first on a residency in 2000, and then with his family on a more permanent basis in 2002, Doig's paintings in some ways became less abstract, the handling tighter, and the internal structures and compositional elements broader. These developments became particularly pronounced after 2000, the year he saw Matisse's Bathers with a Turtle of 1908 at the St. Louis Art Museum. He was deeply affected by this work, which he felt was, and I quote, one of the most extraordinary paintings he had ever seen. The forms and colors were simplified into such large, flat planes that abstraction and figuration balanced each other almost perfectly. Doig began to pay even more attention to the great figures of French art, Daumier, Manet, Cézanne, Bonnard, and Matisse. That is why he called a series of Canoe paintings from 2000 to 2001, boldly simplified into a tripartite structure like Matisse's Bathers and a Turtle, 100 years ago, a time in which so much was accomplished in the development of a new type of painting. As Doig said in 2009, that is our language. So much has happened with painting in the last 100 years that one can profit from and take as nourishment from as a painter. Acknowledging that is extremely important. To this extent, 100 years ago is a sort of manifesto painting in which Doig sets out to explore, as he sees it, the still vital legacy and issues of modernist painting. The canoe floating on the water is one of Doig's iconic images. He first used it back in 1987 in the painting Friday the 13th, when he based the motif on a scene from Sean Cunningham's low-budget 1980 horror film, Friday the 13th, that he was watching one evening in his father's house in Ontario. Doig relates what happened. I saw this scene and went out to the barn and made a painting of it that night. The funny thing about Friday the 13th is that it was the only painting I had ever made that had a direct reference to a movie, but somehow it became part of the official story. People love a hook like that, so they like to think you make paintings from horror movies. In fact, it was the least horrifying moment of the film. It's more like a romantic dream where you remove it from its context. This work and the canoe paintings that Doig made in the 1990s have a psychological intensity and brooding atmosphere that perhaps owes as much to the paintings of Edvard Munch as to the film Friday the 13th. The flowing hair of the woman in the canoe, the way that colors have been heightened and concentrated into powerful shapes that define the compositional structure of the paintings, and the use of strong cast shadows. These are all features that Doig's works have in common with Munch's. By the time he painted the two versions of 100 years ago, in 2002 to 2002, however, Doig had moved from a basically symbolist expressionist treatment of form and color to a more abstract and geometrically structured approach. As mentioned before, Matisse's example was crucial. Not only the impact of an individual work, such as Bathers with a turtle, but of what Matisse's work as a whole represented. One of Matisse's key ideas was condensation, and I quote, again taken from Notes d'un peintre, "I want to reach that state of condensation of sensations which makes a painting. A rapid rendering of a landscape, for example, represents only one moment of its existence. I prefer, by insisting upon its essential character, to risk losing charm in order to obtain greater stability. Condensation and stability are also key aspects of Doig's painting in the early years of the new millennium. There is none of the restlessness and formal complexity of the Canadian paintings of woods and houses. Color is in major blocks and of a largely unmodulated intensity that is both bold and paradoxically restful. One thinks automatically of Matisse's famous sentence, "What I dream of is an art of balance, of purity and serenity, a soothing, calming influence on the mind." The three horizontal bands of color, dark and light, in 100 years ago, Carrera, divide the canvas into roughly equal sections, but these are separated by the red canoe, the canoeist, their reflections in the water, and the island of Carrera off the coast of Trinidad in the background. These vertical accents lock the painting together and prevent it becoming overly abstract. Barnett Newman's zip paintings, especially a horizontal one like Horizon Light, have been cited as influences on Doig's work at this time. But paintings such as Matisse's Bathers with a Turtle, which you've already shown, and French Window at Collioure of 1914 might be just as apposite. Witness the way that each of the three bathers dominates its particular horizontal band of color in the former work, and the way that the horizontal window bars prevent French Window at Collioure from being read as a purely abstract painting. 100 years ago is the first of a number of large horizontal paintings that Doig made in the 2000s. House of Pictures, 2000 to 2002, is also divided into roughly three horizontal bands of color, black, lemon, yellow, and dark red, but these are punctuated by letters. Haus der Bild, the German for House of Pictures. Actually, it would be strictly Haus der Bilder, but that's cut out of the actual work. At the top, 4 dark picture windows through which we can detect various framed works of art hanging in the shop, but which also reflect what is in the street, and a red-haired, dark-coated figure seen from behind, seemingly looking through one of the windows. The scene depicted is based on a photograph that Doig took of a shop selling pictures in Vienna. What aroused his interest is difficult to say for certain. The strong, dark rectangles breaking into the light facade are reminiscent of the houses in several of Doig's earlier Canadian paintings. Doig, certainly prompted by the anthropomorphized buildings in the paintings of the Chicago Imagist Roger Brown, began to give the houses he painted at that time an eerie human presence. Some memory seems to have been aroused in Doig, and perceiving a visual assonance and psychological symmetry, he was intrigued enough to take a photograph a photograph. Similar things happen to us all, but visual artists are particularly sensitive to visual memory. It is one of the things that gives coherence and meaning to their world, and through their work to ours as well. Shapes are not arbitrarily chosen by artists as a recurring theme in their work. They have to have a psychological significance, which the artist is able to make visible in some way. Otherwise, we, the viewers, would be unable to respond. Doig's choice of windows as a motive is highly significant. First, on a purely formal level. Second, because they are loaded with symbolic import. Formally, they provide a geometrical order and structure to compositions. As symbols, they have a long and complex history, both as vistas onto the world and as openings into a revealed or veiled interior. Windows are psychologically weighted, but crucially, they are also about the process of looking, and looking in and looking out. In Doig's case, the windows in House of Pictures provides a series of highly structured breaks in the relentlessly horizontal sweep of the composition, but the dark, cavern-like spaces glimpsed through their rectangles reveal tantalizing glimpses of pictures hanging within and reflections of scenes on the other side of the road. As the shop sign says, this is a house of pictures. This is probably one of the reasons why Doig was fascinated by the facade. It was not called a gallery, but a house containing pictures and images, a house for looking at pictures. The strange figure looking through one of the windows emphasizes that this is a picture about looking at pictures. 2 years after finishing House of Pictures, Doig painted another large canvas of the same title called House of Pictures Carrera of 2004, but this time transplanted from Vienna to Trinidad. It is a strange work, more fantasy than reality, like an abandoned half-built house with 4 windows looking out over the sea towards Carrera, a prison island off the coast of Trinidad. The windows have more or less the same dimensions as the windows in the Vienna painting. It is almost as if Doig were trying to assess the picture-worthiness of Trinidad, or how he could paint Trinidad without falling into the trap of exoticism, as if to remind him not to overlook the gritty present-day reality of the island. He paints a broken bottle of stag beer in the foreground. It is significant that this detail was inspired by a similarly placed bottle in one of Edouard Manet's early darkly realist paintings, The Absinthe Drinker of 1859. There is no figure in Doig's painting, but there is a top-hatted 19th century figure in a series of works that he painted around the same time. Metropolitain House of Pictures is based on a Daumier painting called The Print Collector of 1857 to 63 that Doig saw in the collection of the Art Institute of Chicago. It shows a bohemian-looking male figure examining a print displayed on a densely hung wall in a not dissimilar manner to the way that the mysterious red-haired figure was looking at works of art displayed in the Vienna House of Pictures. It is a classic case of visual assonance, sparking off a memory of an earlier image. The question that Doig must have posed himself was, how could he use this new encounter, this new image in his work? Doig was clearly fascinated by the act of looking at works of art and the way that paintings, drawings, and prints are heavily determined by the format and size of their supports, whether canvas or paper. In Daumier's painting, the prints displayed on the wall come in various shapes and sizes, and we can just make out some of the subjects depicted. Doig, pondering what subjects he could legitimately paint as a Western outsider in Trinidad, used the wall of prints as a device to make this question the subject of a painting, just as the wall of windows in the House of Pictures, Carrera, is a sort of phantom in the Trinidadian landscape. So in Metropolitan House of Pictures, the variously formatted rectangles of possible works of art float like ghosts on an imaginary wall in the landscape. 2 palm trees on the tops of the distant hills make clear that this is in the tropics. In Doig's painting, a male figure is standing looking intently at one of the pictures. It shows a palm tree. You can just make it out here. It shows a palm tree-lined beach with a figure walking along the sea. This is, in fact, based on a painting that Doig had just completed called Pelican. The male figure looking at the work of art is based on Daumier's print, Connoisseur. His stance is the same, and his clothes, complete with coat, cravat, and top hat, are also the same, even if Doig has made him a bit more down at heel, with patches on the arms of his coat. His nose is also red. This marks him out in the eyes of the local Trinidadians as a European who gets a red nose from the intensity of the sun. But he is not only a European, he is a 19th century European, and specifically French, at least he is a character from a French painting. Trinidad was at one time largely settled by French colonists from the neighboring Caribbean island of Martinique. In a way, the figure is therefore a voice, or rather an eye, from the past, come to cast a connoisseur's eye over Doig's view of the island. Of course, put this boldly, such a reading of the painting would be overly narrative, but these issues linger in the background. They inform the formal structure of the work, the way in which rectangles of various shades of green, as well as the largely white pelican painting, hover above a green landscape. Everything is kept flat and parallel with the picture plane, in the classic modernist way, the paradigm of which was set by Matisse's The Red Studio of 1911. In that iconic painting, the whole of the canvas is painted a rusty red color, which unifies the composition and insists on its flatness as a two-dimensional surface. Punctuating this expanse of red are depictions of various key paintings made by Matisse in the previous few years, as if they were hanging in the artist's studio. The various pieces of furniture and the architecture are, however, rendered only in outline, in gaps left in the red background. It was this painting which entered the collection of the Museum of Modern Art in New York in 1949, which had perhaps more impact on the American abstract expressionists than any other single painting. Its insistence on flat color, on all-over design, on equal weight for all parts of the composition were crucial for artists such as Hans Hofmann or Mark Rothko and Barnett Newman. What Doig is doing is carefully positioning himself in the long line of artists who helped establish and develop the modernist tradition of painting, from artists such as Daumier through Matisse, and then to the New York School of Abstract Expressionists. In particular, in works such as 100 Years Ago, House of Pictures, and Metropolitain, Doig is developing ways of using geometrical structures and seeing how they can fit into a figurative framework. Doig is fascinated by walls, windows, and other man-made structures. He continues to take photographs of places that capture his attention, particularly those that are highly colored, painted, and done by amateurs rather than professionals, expressions of a general desire to create some sort of order. The brickwork in the structure of House of Pictures Carrera is inspired by painted brickwork that Doig saw and photographed in Trinidad and elsewhere. The large rectangular structure made up of smaller blue, black, and grey rectangles in ping pong is based, in fact, on a large stack of plastic beer crates that Doig photographed on the island. The wall of multicolored stones in the painting La Pérouse Wall of 2004 is based on the wall of the same name that encloses the main graveyard in Port of Spain in Trinidad. Doig took several photographs of it, especially of the stained rough cast that covers some of the stones. In the heart of Old San Juan of 1999, a basketball court seen from an elevated position and above one of the basket holders is based on a photograph of a brightly colored court in Puerto Rico. It emphasizes the geometrical patterns painted on the ground and of the basket holders at both ends. In Maracas, a large open-air sound system stacked up like a ziggurat is loosely based on actual speakers that Doig had seen in Trinidad. Sketches that he made show him emphasizing the ziggurat-like structure, and there are various of these on display upstairs in showcases. More recently, Doig has painted a figure standing in front of a decorative screen made up of regularly repeated geometrical uprights. Behind that, on the left, is a yellow wall whose bricks have been picked out in full geometrical detail. House of Cards, See You There, of 2007 to 9, makes a very specific contrast between the geometrical regularity of the screen and wall on the one hand, and the tree, hanging leaves, and flowers on the other. Both have their decorative qualities, but one is man-made, the other is natural. The title encapsulates the opposition. The colorful decorative quality of this work is reminiscent of classic interior paintings by Matisse and Bonnard, which show highly colorful interiors with views through a window or balcony to an almost paradisial garden beyond. In such a painting as Red Interior, Still Life on a Blue Table of 1947, which is in the Kunstsammlung Nordrhein-Westfalen in Düsseldorf, Matisse deliberately creates a rhythmical assonance between the zigzagging black lines covering the red interior, continued in the pathway or balcony seen through the window, and the insistent patterns of the leaves and branches in the garden outside. In a similar way, Doig sets up a comparison between the hanging fronds of the tree and the brickwork. Although the leaves are organic, they have a regularity about them that is not out of place in a built-up setting. As previously mentioned, pure landscape represented something of a problem for Doig after he had moved to Trinidad. He felt uneasy about painting what could be seen as the exotic qualities of the island, its palm trees, blue seas, white beaches, cloudless, sunny skies, and tropical vegetation. He did not want to be seen as a Western tourist or visitor. Having said that, Doig knew that landscape was very much at the heart of his art, and he had to find a way into it that was not exploitative and that came out of his own working methods. One of the first pure landscapes inspired by Trinidad that Doig painted was Grande Rivière of 2001-2. It is based on photographs that Doig took in Grande Rivière on the north coast of Trinidad, which show a white horse surrounded by large black birds by the side of the eponymous river. Doig was obviously attracted to the idea of a white horse and black birds, not only for its purely visual effect, but also perhaps for the connotations of magic and pagan cults. But the horse and birds are but one small visual incident in the painting, which has such a rich tapestry of forms and colors that they could easily be overlooked. Indeed, the all-over nature of the composition, with no one focal point, the white horse on the left, for example, is echoed by a white boat on the right. The mirroring of the starlit sky in the foreground water, the closely related shades of green in the forest beyond the river, the way in which Doig has allowed large areas of paint to run down the canvas in streaks and drips. All of the above work together to give the painting a distinctly abstract feeling. Unlike geometrical abstraction, the sort suggested in such paintings as House of Pictures, Metropolitain, or Maracas, the abstraction that comes to mind with Grande Rivière is both nature-inspired and process-driven. It does not begin with a master plan, but proceeding from a visual stimulus of a photograph, and several included in the present exhibition, and direct memories, it pays close attention to subtle changes in form and color, as well as the accidents of the actual painting process. One of the artists Doig greatly admires, Pierre Bonnard, also achieved a rich tapestry-like effect of colors. Doig described what he perceives to be Bonnard's approach to painting, and I quote, "By and large, his, i.e. Bonnard's paintings, are about modesty. I don't think he worked according to a master plan. Not having one allowed him to work on fragments without any conscious intention. For ages, I've been interested in recording time like Bonnard, through drawing that's directly related to painting, every tiny moment. This painter created a space for reality-based memories, somewhere behind one's eyes, somewhere between seeing and thinking. Thanks to Bonnard, who was able to translate this strange state so well into color, one is able to be like someone lying in bed, remembering with great effort what something looked like." These highly perceptive remarks about Bonnard throw light on Doig's own working methods, particularly in his landscapes. Doig has on several occasions said that he would like to be less reliant on photographs and trust more to memory. The trouble with such a work as Grande Rivière is that the intricacy of the foliage in the forest makes it impossible to have a detailed memory of the scene. Doig still had to rely on photographs, but he was willing to allow accidents in applying the paint to dictate to a certain extent how the work developed. In other works, such as Driftwood of 2001-2, painted around the same time, the photograph was little more than a jumping-off point for a more abstract work. The driftwood in the foreground is sketched in as if in a drawing, and the couple in the middle distance show their photographic derivation, particularly in the way that the shading is represented, and also in the way the small vignette seems to be collaged onto the painting. But apart from that, the work could easily be read as a lyrical abstract painting, especially at the bottom where the horizontal brushstrokes gradually fade out and only the underlying drips of paint can be seen. The painterliness of driftwood is continued in the two large pelican paintings of 2003 to 4. The one called Pelican Stag is particularly interesting. Doig has taken the techniques of pouring and staining the canvas to new and radical lengths, creating a rich depth to the background of palm trees and contrasting this with the positive waterfall of light that highlights the solitary figure walking along the beach. The light blue paint is a block of color in the center of the canvas, but at the bottom it turns into ragged ribbons of dripping paint. Doig has acknowledged the impact of seeing Matisse's painting Shaft of Sunlight in the woods of Trivaux of 1917 that was shown in Tate's Matisse Picasso show in 2002. In that painting, Matisse radically rendered a shaft of light in a wood by a block of white paint. But interestingly, it is in precisely this block of light stroke paint that Doig places his realistically rendered figure, and this figure is based on a photograph. Doig has often told the story of how he came to paint this figure. It is worth recounting for what it says about his working methods and his way of thinking in visual forms. He talks, for example, to his friend and fellow artist Chris Affini about, and I quote, "the incident with the pelican that you and I witnessed the first time we came to Trinidad." That was in 2000. "We saw this guy on a remote beach bobbing around in the sea in his underwear with a pelican. At first I thought he was rescuing the pelican, or it had broken its wing. Then it became clear that he was trying to drown it. He came onto the beach, and as he walked along the sand, you could see that he was swinging the pelican around by its neck. The way the pelican was looping and looping, he was obviously wringing its neck. He glared at me as if to say, 'You shouldn't be watching this.' Of course, he was probably getting something to eat. It felt voyeuristic watching him, but also incredibly exciting. I attempted to make paintings of this from my memory. I don't think we would have taken a photograph of this man." And instead, Doig used a photograph of a man dragging a net along the beach in southern India, one of a number of photographs he had found in London. It is typical that Doig should use a replacement, but also that he should have a similar image in mind. Instead of a man in Trinidad reminding him of the man in southern India, it may in fact have been the other way round. Delving deeper, one might even speculate that deep in Doig's visual memory might have been a photograph such as this of a Tahitian youth drinking from a waterfall, taken by Charles Spitz and used by Van Dieren Koch in his pioneering book, The Painter and the Photograph, to show how Paul Gauguin changed it as a basis for his painting Pape Moe, Mysterious Water of 1893. Koch comments thus about the changes Gauguin made to the image. In the painting, the water flows into a pool at the foot of the Tahitian, rather than dropping out of the picture as it does in the photograph. The change provided Gauguin with a motif in which he could include the flowing forms he loved so much to paint. Doig is intensely aware of the way that painters, especially in France, used photography from the late 19th century onwards. He may not have been consciously aware of this particular photograph and painting, but a general knowledge of the history must have informed his choices and procedures. Of particular interest to him must have been the idea that having a piercingly realistically, photographically derived figure next to a passage of paint that is emphatically, materially real was not contradictory or antithetical. The two forms of realism could be mutually reinforcing. They both speak visually to us as corporeal, physical beings. Had not Pollock's drips and splashes been eloquent testimony of his bodily movements? Had not Roland Barthes talked about certain aspects of a photograph which wound one, as it were, physically, with their poignancy? Barthes called this aspect the punctum. He wrote about in his book Camera Lucida in the following way: a photograph's punctum is that accident which pricks me, but also bruises me, is poignant to me. What Doig has done is to link a disturbing mental image of a man glaring at him on a beach for daring to watch him kill a pelican with a photographic and subsequently painted image, and to make this his punctum. Doig often uses figures as an unsettling or pivotal element in his paintings. The canoeist in 100 years ago, the red-headed, dark-coated figure looking at the pictures in House of Pictures, the print connoisseur in Metropolitain, the man with an umbrella in La Pérouse Wall of 2004, the girl in white with trees of 2001 to 2, the mysterious figure emerging from the trees in an untitled jungle painting of 2007, the man dressed as Bat, 2002 to 7, the figure in a white swimming costume in a figure by a pool and walking figure by a pool, the drinking man in Stag, 2002 to 5, and perhaps most intriguing of all, the blue-robed figure in Music of the Future. In this large painting, which is partly based on a photograph of somewhere in southern India, the blue figure can barely be made out. It's the figure. It's just there. The blue figure can be barely made out, not just because the scene is twilit and everything is cast in a dark blue penumbra, but because he is tiny, an almost insignificant element in a busy leisure scene. But once one notices him seated on the right, a little way in front of a sort of clubhouse, it is impossible to ignore. Numerous questions automatically ask themselves. Why is he sitting alone? Why is he swathed in a biblical robe? Who could he be? As if to try and answer some of these questions, Doig paints several smaller works focusing on this character, and there's a whole group of these shown in the exhibition upstairs, showing in greater detail his immediate context and zooming in until only he is in the frame. This is the way that filmmakers work, beginning with a wide-angle establishing shot, showing the general location, and then focusing more and more closely on the specific figure of interest. Doig has, in fact, painted a large work of this blue-robed figure. Entitled By a River of 2004. The man with the dark beard could be anyone, but he has a distinctly biblical air and is reminiscent to me at least, of the figure of John the Baptist in Gaunt St. painting, St. John the Baptist in the Wilderness of 1490 to 95 in the Gemälde Gallery in Berlin. It is, of course, highly appropriate that Doig's painting should be called By a River, because St. John baptized Christ in the River Jordan. If Doig's figures are nearly always based on photographic sources, then his landscapes give him the opportunity to be much freer, to invent and to allow chance and discoveries thrown up by process a bigger role in determining the outcome of a painting. Mal d'Estogmac is one of the most abstract works. Indeed, at first sight, it is difficult to make out what is what. The title almost suggests it might be a mood painting, until one learns that Mal d'Estogmac is a bay off the north coast of Trinidad, so called because the rough sea could cause stomach upsets. Only knowing this can one really begin to interpret the somberly pink rectangle in the lower half of the painting as a view out over the sea, at sunset perhaps. Above there is a blue sky and what looks like a large dark blue cloud, but on closer inspection one realizes that it actually lies below the horizon line. Looked at close up, the way the work has been painted shows that Doig is more concerned with painterly effects than trying to evoke the exact feeling of either sea, sky, or cloud. The underlying layers of blue and pink have a more pronounced flatness of color, and horizontal bands of darker and lighter blues, separated by white, can be observed in the sky. On top of these, lighter shades of blue and pink have been added, but unevenly, so that variations in tone create a gently pulsing sensation. The effect is similar to that found in the work of such American abstract expressionists as Mark Rothko. But there's also perhaps more than a nod to the North European Romantic tradition of Caspar David Friedrich, Ferdinand Hodler, and Edvard Munch, and to Robert Rosenblum's much-discussed book, Modern Painting, and the Northern Romantic tradition, Friedrich de Rothko, which makes a compelling case for an alternative genealogy of modern abstract painting. This was not the usual textbook, Royal Road, basically French, from the Impressionists, the Post-Impressionists, through Fauvism, Cubism, pre-war European abstraction, and finally to American abstract expressionism, but another subsidiary route. Key markers along this road were works such as this, Friedrich's highly abstracted and iconic painting, Monk by the Sea, Munch's Starry Night, and Rothko's Number 10 of 1950, very much the type of works that seem to inform the painting of Mal d'Estogmac. Night Painting, North Coast of 2012, which is not in the present show, is one of Doig's most recent landscape paintings. But being set at night, little in the way of individual landscape features are visible. The only recognizable shapes are palm fronds and part of the porch of the artist's house on the right of the composition. These are formed either by leaving the canvas bare or by sketching in the minimum to suggest green foliage. Otherwise, the area making up the lower two-thirds of the canvas are painted in great washes of blue, some darker, some lighter, and at the top, an area of dull, somber green, suggesting perhaps nearby trees and undergrowth, or alternatively the night sky. Although Doig based the painting on a photograph taken outside his house, the lack of detail and all-enveloping dark means that he can invent and let the actual process of painting suggest ways forward. This is one of the freest and most spontaneous of Doig's paintings, and one in which he perhaps comes closest to an ideal of abstraction, not non-figuration, that he dreams of his work. As he said to Crisafini, his fellow painter, the question for a lot of painters is, why can't we just make a painting? You're searching for a way to make pure painting. Painting should evolve into a type of abstraction. It should slowly dissipate into something else through time, through working, seeing things through. It becomes unnecessary to have narrative subjects, and that's difficult to come to terms with. The only narrative that night painting North Coast has is painting itself. Mal d'Estomac and Night Painting North Coast are perhaps the most abstract of Doig's works to date. They represent one particular strand of his output, perhaps a strand that he will develop further in the future. But in general, Doig aims at a juste milieu, a balance, or better still, a synthesis between abstraction and figuration. After all, when Doig is inspired by something that he has seen, a man with a hand-painted pink umbrella, for example, as in La Pérouse's wall, it is ultimately impossible to separate the forms and colors from the specific phenomena to which they belong. Humans experience things as an integrated whole. Visual artists are no exceptions. They may be hypersensitive to visual stimuli and able to focus on aspects of the visual world that we might miss. But nevertheless, associations, feelings, memories are still attached to these visual incidents, and it marks out the great artists, such as Peter Doig, that they are able to convey to us at least some of the affective richness that they experience in looking at them.